We finished talking about most of the central metabolites. Okay, so we went from beginning of the class, we went from glycolysis, TCA cycle, pentose phosphate, glycosylate shunt, primary central metabolite. Okay, central metabolism. And then we started talking about photosynthesis. We started talking about fatty acid biosynthesis, fatty acid degradation. Okay, and then we just talked about membrane lipids. Okay, so most of the central stuff is done. So before we talk about the interesting secondary metabolites, first I want to finish talking about the membrane part. Okay, so we're first going to discuss about cholesterol and in general steroids. Okay, you guys heard about steroids before? 就是那个 illegal 药嘛，然后打了你会变大只那种，有没有？就是运动员会打的禁药 steroids 很多时候。Steroid class of molecules, typically they all look something like this. Right? You have 4 rings, the A, B, C, D rings, and then where A, B, C are 6-member rings, and then the D is a 5-member ring. Right? So this is the general steroid structure. Okay. Now steroids include many different types of molecules. For example, cholesterol. Okay. Cholesterol is a component in your cell membrane. It's actually a very important component of your cell membrane. You have, as we talked about, bile acids and bile salts. Okay, if you have modifications on carbons here, that will generate acid groups. That makes it bile acids. Okay, and we talked about bile acids for degrading TAG. Okay, bile acids. Very quickly, just tell you where we get bile acids from. Remember that bile acids are very important for degradation of triacylglycerides. Okay, lipids. Right now. Bile acids comes from cholesterol. Okay, so it comes from cholesterol. You go from cholesterol. By the way, you don't have to remember the structures for these guys. Okay, you just have to remember the general structure. There's no way you can remember structure for these things. Right? You just have to know. For my purpose for this class, I want you to understand what kind of metabolites comes from where. Okay, so bile acids come from cholesterol. Okay, so that's the important message here. So bile acids, remember we saw cholic acid, these things all come from cholesterol, okay, through hydroxylases, okay, and many steps you can generate different bile acids, right? So what you can see is that bile acids account for 90% of cholesterol catabolism in a normal human adult, okay? So if your body has too much cholesterol, your body is going to metabolize them into bile acids. Okay. Now, bile acids is somewhat water soluble, right? Because it has a hydrophilic portion to it, and then you can excrete it. Okay, through like take a dump, and then you get some bile acids out. Okay, so daily elimination in feces. Feces is like your poop. Okay, it's about 400 to 500 milligrams. And that's actually quite a lot. So you're daily pooping out a lot of cholesterol. Okay, so if you want to lower your cholesterol, obviously just stop eating cholesterol, and then gradually, you exercise and stuff like that, and then you will be able to lower your cholesterol. Normal human adult. Okay, 这个不 apply to if you're sick 哦。你要是有一些相关疾病的话，那当然你的 cholesterol 就下不来。Okay, all right. Hormone biosynthesis. Okay, tell you a little bit on hormone. Right, so it's also based on cholesterol. Okay, so basic cholesterol structure is this. Okay? This is cholesterol structure. So you get this basic structure. Right? Using this basic structure, you make bile acids, you make hormones. Hormone, you have in particular this molecule which I can't even pronounce it. It's like whatever. Okay, P something, pregnenolone, right? Whatever. Okay, I can't pronounce this. It's tough. Right. But anyways, you get this precursor to all hormones, and this is actually the precursors that you use to make your sex hormones, like female sex hormone, male sex hormone. Okay, and it comes from cholesterol. Okay, which is why a lot of people said, you should really stay away from very high like high lipid stuff, especially for when you're young. Okay, if you're very very young, you're like 7, 8 years old, and you start to eat, you feed your kids with a lot of like meat, a lot of high calorie stuff. Okay, you are actually triggering, in a way, triggering the synthesis of sex hormones. Okay, and where do your sex hormones come from? They come from cholesterol, right? So it's from a metabolic standpoint, it really makes sense because you're feeding your diet with a lot of these intake. Okay, so you do trigger premature sexual development. Okay, all right. Hormone biosynthesis. It looks crazy, I know, but you don't have to remember the structures. Just again remember the precursors to hormone comes from cholesterol. Okay. And hormones, there are many different types, okay? And let's first take a look on the right, okay? So you go through some lyases, and then you eventually get down to the androgens, which are the male sex hormones, okay? You have testosterone, okay? Dihydrotestosterone, all of these are male sex hormones, all right? And then going from the male sex hormones, and if you were to do a modification on that, okay, if you see here, initially it's ketone. Now you can but you rearrange it so that you have a phenyl ring right here, and this becomes a hydroxyl group. Those are your female sex hormones, okay? So this is one of the reasons why people, or back in maybe middle school, okay, you probably heard of this thing where your teachers are always saying that females are evolutionarily more advanced than males. Okay, it makes sense because they have one more enzymes that the males don't have. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why they say that. Right? In addition to your sex hormones, you also have a lot of other types of hormone messengers. For example, you have things that can regulate your potassium, your sodium chloride bicarbonate balances. Okay. Or you can have things that promote gluconeogenesis, okay? And in pharmacological doses, it can suppress inflammation. This thing is actually very interesting, okay? Cortisol. Cortisol is a type of steroid immunosuppressant, okay? You can make chemical derivatives of this, like for example, hydrocortisone, those type of chemical, you can actually buy them from pharmacy, okay? This type of molecules are derived from cholesterol, okay? Just to show you what it looks like and just to show you what kind of functions are these cholesterol-derived hormones can do, okay? All right, so that was that. Cholesterol biosynthesis, so now I want you to understand how you make cholesterol, okay? So obviously cholesterol is important because it's used to make hormones, used to make bile acids, used to make immuno whatever stuff. Okay, now let's take a look at how you make cholesterol. Okay, so cholesterol is made, okay, essentially is made from this thing called squalene through these reactions, which you don't have to know, okay, you don't have to remember, but just understand that you start with this thing called squalene. Okay, and of course, if you look at squalene, and squalene has all these alkene units inside. And all these alkene units, they can react to each other. And then that's how you form the rings. Okay, so through alkenes, and then you can have carbon-carbon reactions. Okay? Squalene. Squalene is a 30-carbon long derivative of this thing called isoprenoids. Okay? So it's a 30-carbon long molecule. Okay, it has 30 carbons, and essentially it's 6-carbon repeat of this general structure called isoprene. Okay, so if you look, this part, this, and then that. Okay, so you have 6 of these things. Okay, so it's a repeat. Anytime when you have a molecule that have repeats, and then you should immediately think, okay, it must be some kind of repetitive synthesis. Okay, just like, for example, fatty acids or some other stuff, okay? So it's some kind of iterative pathway that can generate this, right? Okay, so isoprenoids. Okay, so this is what I wanted to introduce. Isoprenoids. Okay, isoprenoids, or sometimes they're referred to as terpenes. Okay, so they are an extraordinarily large and diverse group of molecules. Okay, so there's a lot. Okay, I cannot express how many different kinds of molecules that are derived from this class of precursors. Okay, so they are derivatives of this thing called isoprene, but they are not. In biology, it's not this that make you all the other stuff. I'll show you. Okay, it's another different precursor because isoprene is a gas. Okay, isoprene is a gas, so it's not really in your body. Okay, we are using something very similar to isoprene, but chemically they are polymers of isoprene. Okay, and these molecules, they include steroids, they include bile acids, lipid-soluble vitamins, phytol. Remember we saw phytol when we talked about alpha degradation. Okay, they're used to make coenzyme Q. Okay, remember when we talked about CoQ, we said Q10， 有没有？那 Q10 的那个 10呢，就是在讲 isoprene 的 repeat 了10次，所以它叫 Q10. Okay, it's also a component of rubber. Okay, so natural rubber is made out of isoprene. Okay, this thing called latex. Okay, latex. All right, so isoprene or isoprenoids biosynthesis, all of them are essentially synthesized using the quote isoprene intermediate building block. And this isoprene building block is represented by two different molecules inside of biology. They are these things called the dimethylallyl pyrophosphate. In short, we call DMAPP, okay? Or the isopentenyl pyrophosphate, what we generally call IPP. Okay, so DMAPP, IPP. Okay, this you have to remember. Okay, DMAPP and IPP. Okay, 这个就要知道了. Right? Okay, DMAPP and IPP. All right, so assuming you have these molecules, how do you make squalene? Okay, DMAPP and IPP, since they have alkenes. Okay, so what this guy can do is they can react with this carbon, it leaves. Okay, so then you would be able to generate a carbon-carbon bond. Okay, is that right? Did I draw this right? It looks weird. Okay, I'm going to erase this and pretend I didn't say that. Okay, because it looks kind of weird. Where do you get the double bond from? Okay, all right. Regardless, you have DMAPP plus IPP, and then you generate this intermediate. We usually call it GPP because it's geranyl pyrophosphate. Okay, DMAPP plus IPP gives you GPP. Okay, GPP, you add it with another IPP, and then you get this farnesyl pyrophosphate, FPP. Okay. All right. So turns out, hey, I was right, kind of. Okay, I was right, kind of. Right. So yeah, you take the double bond and then you react it with this particular carbon right here. Okay, such that you generate a new carbon-carbon bond. Okay, so it is like that. However, it's just that here you have a hydrogen. It claps back down. Okay, so like that, this thing. All right, so you get GPP and GPP do the same thing again, 100% same thing. You take another IPP, react it with GPP on this carbon, and then you form FPP, F pyrophosphate. Okay, right? And I'll show you in just a minute, but essentially squalene is two FPP come together, you get squalene. Okay, I'll show you that maybe a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about how you get DMAPP and IPP. Okay, so DMAPP and IPP comes from acetyl-CoA. Okay, so now you know cholesterol comes from where? Acetyl-CoA. Okay, and it makes sense because when you have a lot of, when you want to make fatty acids, you make fats. Acetyl-CoA is a lot, and if you want to make lipids, you go from acetyl-CoA. Okay, acetyl-CoA makes DMAPP, IPP. DMAPP, IPP makes FPP, makes squalene. Squalene makes cholesterol. Okay, all right. So coming from acetyl-CoA, okay, go from acetyl-CoA, and what you're going to do is you're going to take acetyl-CoA to this thing called the HMG-CoA. And now, HMG-CoA, these two enzymes you saw before, okay, in the ketone body biosynthesis. Okay, so you're going to take two acetyl-CoA, add them together, make acetyl-CoA. You add another acetyl-CoA, and then you generate this hydroxymethyl-glutaryl-CoA, which is HMG-CoA. Okay, we're good? Now, you're going to take HMG-CoA. Let's pay attention to this portion. It's an acyl-CoA, and then you do two-step reduction to an alcohol. Okay, so intermediate, you have aldehyde and the alcohol. Okay, huh? Right? This is called mevalonate. Okay, so this pathway is called the mevalonate pathway, named for this molecule. Okay, and then go from mevalonate. Okay, mevalonate is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbon molecule, and your IPP and DMAPP is a 5 carbon molecule. So somewhere you should know that you lost 1 carbon. Okay, so it turns out mevalonate, you will use a mevalonate kinase, ATP, and you generate this thing called the mevalonate 5-phosphate, and then you take phosphomevalonate kinase, you get mevalonate diphosphate. Okay, so the PP part 出来了. Okay, so you get the PP part. Right, so the pyrophosphate is right there. And then you would do a pyrophosphate, all right, mevalonate, this other actually I don't know what this stands for, PMD, okay, but essentially it's another kinase that is going to activate this OH, and then you get a phosphate, okay, a phosphoryl group. And then this guy can then leave and you generate your alkene. Okay, so as this thing leaves, the electrons here will stay on here. Okay, and you generate IPP. IPP, you can do a isomerization reaction, isomerase, and you generate DMAPP. Okay, so IPP, DMAPP comes from acetyl-CoA. For your purpose, you don't have to remember the details of the pathway. Again, I want you to remember the substrates, okay, where these things come from, okay? All right. Yeah, so that was the mechanism, okay? So the mechanism of how you go from pyrophosphomevalonate, it's a decarboxylase, okay, and then you can generate this IPP. All right. So from 2-FPP, okay, FPP1, FPP1, FPP2, okay, you add them together and you get squalene. All right, mechanism, again, you don't have to remember, okay, just so that it's there. In the future, if for whatever reason you're studying this, you can go back to the slides and you say, okay, this is the mechanism, okay? So understand, squalene comes from 2-FPP. So to give you a short example of what people are doing in terms of drug discovery, okay? All right, so as you can see from the title slide, enzyme targets for cholesterol lowering drug. Cholesterol, okay, cholesterol 是一个现代人的疾病 ，OK， 就是胆固醇太高，胆固醇过高。什么古代怎么可能有胆固醇太高，对不对？因为光是吃，你要是能吃到饭，你就已经很了不起了，更何况是吃到肉。OK， 那各位记得，胆固醇这种东西在植物里面的含量是非常非常的低 ，OK， 动物的含量比较高，所以胆固醇这种东西其实是一个 modern disease。OK， 那 of course because nowadays people are quite wealthy and we're eating all sorts of random stuff, okay? And we have a lot of weird, like crazy diseases. Obviously, number one, cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol is a huge amount. Of course, having high cholesterol does not mean you're sick. It just means that you have a higher risk of heart attack. Okay, so excessive cholesterol increases the risk of cardiovascular diseases. Okay, obviously. So if you are a drug company, then you're saying, hey, okay, if I can make a drug that will lower cholesterol, it will sell for a lot of money. Makes sense, okay? So as a result, drugs that can inhibit cholesterol biosynthesis would definitely help to reduce cardiovascular diseases. So as a result, it has a huge market. And long ago, HMG-CoA reductase, okay, show you again what it looks like, okay? HMG-CoA reductase is this, okay, this thing. Go from HMG-CoA to mevalonate, okay? This HMG-CoA reductase has been characterized as the rate-limiting step in cholesterol biosynthesis, okay? So as always, if you are able to inhibit the rate-limiting step, then it kills the downstream biosynthesis, okay? So as a result, HMG-CoA reductase was the target for lowering cholesterol, okay? So we have various HMGR or HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, okay? Either found naturally or semi-synthetically, okay? And these HMG-CoA inhibitors are called statins, okay? So if later on in your career, you guys go study in drug discovery and design, every time you hear statins, these molecules are HMG-CoA inhibitors, okay? Some famous ones are lovastatin and civastatin, okay? Lovastatin and civastatins, they are fungal polyketides. We will talk about polyketides in our next class, okay? They are molecules synthesized by fungus. But lovastatin and civastatin are fungal polyketides, and then you can have a derivative version of it. You take these and you react it, and you have atorvastatin, okay? It's a synthetic version. And Lipitor, okay? Lipitor, if you go Google Lipitor, you'll see it's amazing. It sells so much money, okay? It's a huge demand. 不当然主要是因为你知道现在真的 cholesterol 过高的人很多嘛 okay? Lipitor, right? So statin drugs and the reason why it works is that these statin drugs, they all carry a mevalonate-like moiety. For example, if you look at lovastatin and civastatin, the natural version, on the very top, the blue portion, it looks kind of like HMG-CoA or mevalonate if you bend mevalonate, okay? So you have a ketone here, you have a ketone there, and then you have a O minus, and you have a ester bond right there, okay? And then an OH here, an OH there, okay? So it looks like the substrate, okay? But it's not the substrate. So then if you have lovastatin or civastatin, then you can use that to inhibit your HMG-CoA reductase, okay? Once you inhibit the HMG-CoA reductase, then the downstream mevalonate pathway is gone, okay? You don't make them anymore, right? So you can lower cholesterol, okay? So we're now talking about other important isoprenoids, okay? So isoprenoids, very quickly, remember that isoprenoids are these molecules that are essentially derived from isoprene, okay? That are essentially derived from isoprene repeat units, okay? So isoprenoids, essentially they're talking about isoprene, quote, okay? So they're derived from isoprene. And remember that isoprene, like that, okay? Isoprene is going to look something like this, right? So every time if you see some branching and some alkenes in your molecule, there's a high possibility that it's going to be derived from isoprene, okay? Another key characteristic or feature of isoprene is that the molecule is probably going to be a multiple of 5 carbons, okay? Because each isoprene is 5 carbons, and let's say you have cholesterol, which is probably 30 carbons or above, right? And the above, right, the additional carbons require further reactions, okay? But just remember that isoprenoids are essentially derived from DMAPP and IPP. Okay? That's something that we talked about, right? So other important isoprenoid-based compounds, they include, for example, vitamin A. Okay, so this entire class, you have this guy, and this guy. They're all considered vitamin A. Okay, so vitamin A is good for your what? Eyes, right? For example, okay? So this is something that gives you a survival advantage because, you know, if you have eyes, you have vision, and You can use that to see things. Okay, so your vitamin A is good for some of those functions. Now, vitamin A is derived from where? Okay, so it turns out it's derived from beta carotene. Okay, beta carotene you find in a lot of what? 有没有知道 beta carotene? Carrots. Okay, so they're found in a lot of carrots. 胡萝卜. Okay, so which is why people always say if you like 你知道小时候爸妈你妈应该会跟你讲说什么多吃胡萝卜啦，对眼睛好啦，或者怎样怎样的。Okay, yeah, that's why. Okay, so beta carotene is found a lot in carrots, okay, so which is why your mom is going to tell you, yeah, you should eat more carrots, because once you have beta carotene in your diet, okay, and then what you can do is your body can use a monooxygenase, okay. Monooxygenase uses molecular oxygen as a substrate, but here, check this out. Essentially, what it's going to do is it's going to incorporate one oxygen atom into the molecule, right? So that's why it's called the monooxygenase. If it's called dioxygenase, then both molecules of oxygen in molecular oxygen will end up on the molecule. Okay, so monooxygenase, dioxygenase. Okay, okay? Should be pretty straightforward. All right, so using your monooxygenase, what you can do is you can cleave beta carotene in half, okay, such that then you put an oxygen atom onto each half of the beta carotene, because if you look at the beta carotene molecule, it's pretty symmetrical, right? 它蛮对称的, okay? So cut it in the middle, and then you'll get retinal, okay? So this is the all trans retinal, okay? Do you guys remember where we saw retinal? Photosynthesis, okay? 我们在 photosynthesis 的时候有讲到一个那个 archaea 的一个很特别的 one subunit 蛋白叫 bacterial rhodopsin， 有没有？不是说那个 bacterial rhodopsin 可以 expose 到 light and then 它可以 start pumping protons, okay? So it uses this thing, okay? So retinal, right? So this is going to tell you that retinal or these vitamin A molecules are going to respond to light, okay? So that's great. All right, vitamin A, turns out you have the aldehyde derivative and the alcohol derivative and the acid derivative. Okay, so you have three types of vitamin A. You can have the aldehyde, the alcohol, and the acids. Now, turns out the interconversion is quite simple. You know, you just go from aldehyde to alcohol is a what? It's a reduction, okay? Alcohol to, let's say, aldehyde, it's an oxidation, okay? So aldehyde to acid is another oxidation, okay? 这个各位一定要搞清楚哦。Alcohol, aldehyde 跟 acid 这三个东西会在 biochemistry 的里面会 repeatedly 出现 ，OK？ 所以 always remember alcohol, aldehyde, acid, OK？ 或者是 acid, aldehyde, alcohol, OK？ Always 这个一定要记得。Okay, so that's vitamin A, okay? Additionally, what you can also have is, for example, you can have based on cholesterol. Now, in this particular case, here the OH is gone, so it's 7-dehydrocholesterol. And what you can see is that the cholesterol is used to make your vitamin D, vitamin E. Okay? So remember that a while ago, okay, 可能你小时候那个应该有学到说 vitamin D 啊，是不是靠吃的，是去靠晒太阳的 ，OK？ 为什么？主要是因为 in your body， 你的身体可以做这个东西，因为它是 based on cholesterol，OK？ This thing is based on cholesterol. And then if you expose to UV light, okay, UV light, and then what you can do is you can start forming this vitamin D molecule, and then you just look at where it changed. Okay, what's different? Okay, essentially what's different is that you got this bond right here that's gone. Right? It's a bond that broke. Okay, so that is your vitamin D. Okay? And vitamin D is obviously very important for a lot of different purposes. For example, it affects your bone density, it affects your calcium intake, that kind of stuff. Okay? All right. In addition, you can also have isoprenoids-based compound, for example, vitamin E. Okay. And how do I know it's isoprenoids-based? Okay. Check this out. Okay. You have this repeat of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 carbon repeats. So it's going to tell you, and oh, by the way, there's a branch, right? So here's a methyl group. So it's going to tell you that, yeah, maybe this guy is also an isoprenoid-based compound. Okay? So vitamin E indeed is a type of isoprenoids-based compound. Right? In addition, we saw quinone. Okay? We saw quinone. In this particular example is phyloquinone, which is vitamin K1. Okay? Vitamin K you usually don't hear so much about, okay? But it's important, right? It's there because you guys know that quinones are important electron mediators, right? We talked about in the electron transport chain. We talked about it in photosynthesis, okay? 这些 quinone 类型的 compound 可以拿来做在 ETC 电子传递链里面的一些 electron mediating 的 reactions, okay? Things like that. These are all based on your isoprenoids. So I just want you to have a feeling of how broad this class of molecule is. Okay? It is a huge class molecule. Okay. There are some other isoprenoids-based compounds that are useful. Okay? For example, limonene. Okay? Limonene is responsible for the lemon flavor that you can smell. Okay? It's one of the key characteristic odor of lemons. Right? Limonene is something also people try to make for biofuel, okay? Because it's 10 carbons and it's good to burn, right? So this is something that people want to do. Oh yeah, by the way, here if you look at on the left here, the class, there are some names, okay, which you don't really have to remember, but remember, I want you to know terpenes, okay? This word, terpene, okay? Terpenes essentially is talking about a 10 carbon molecule, okay, that's from isoprenoids, okay? So essentially 2 isoprene units combined together, they form a terpene, right? Now, why do I want you to remember terpenes, okay? Because if it's 10, okay, if it's 10 carbons, it's called monoterpene. If it's 15 carbon, it's called the sesquiterpene. If it's 20 carbons, then it's going to be called diterpene. 30 carbons, triterpene. Okay, so every terpene is going to be 10 carbons. Okay, so you can see that for monoterpene, sesquiterpene, diterpene, triterpene, you have a lot of different important biological molecules like limonene, juvenile hormone 1, which is insect hormone, okay? Or in plants, you have plant hormone, okay? Or squalene. Remember we saw squalene. That is the cholesterol precursor. Squalene, guys, you have to know, okay? You have to know squalene because it is the precursor to cholesterol, okay? And if I ask you, how many acetyl-CoAs are necessary to make squalene? You guys should know. 不要跟我说15个哦 ，OK？ 这个 pathway MVA pathway 回去看一下 ，OK？ 做一个 squalene 不是15个 acetyl-CoA 啊，你会说，奇怪啊 ，squalene 是30个碳 ，acetyl-CoA 是2个碳啊，不就刚好15个 acetyl-CoA 吗？不是哦 ，OK？ 记得你要做5个碳，对不对？你要吃掉3个 acetyl-CoA， 因为中间会有一个 decarboxylation。OK， 在 MVA pathway 里面 ，that's something you should know. Okay, so yeah, write that down. Okay, so make sure you know how to make squalene. Okay, that is, for example, how many acetyl-CoA that you should know. Okay. Right. You also have things like tetraterpene, okay, so it's going to be 40 carbons, right? So for example, your lycopene. Lycopene is found in your tomatoes, okay, so that's the thing that makes it red. So in metabolic engineering, you know, my research, what we can do is we can make E. coli that produce a lot of lycopene, okay? Why would you want to do that? because lycopene is good for food additive, okay? And it's also a natural coloring agent, okay? 天然色素 lycopene, 对不对？因为它是红的。Alright, so if you engineer your E. coli to produce a lot of lycopene, then your E. coli is red, okay? And it looks nasty, I tell you, okay? It looks nasty, right? And you also have these things called the polyprenols, okay? And polyprenols are essentially, sometimes they're used, for example, here it says sugar carriers, or for example, polyisoprene is used as natural rubber, okay, like trees, right? Trees will secrete polyisoprene, and then this guy is latex. 我说 latex， 你们知道它是什么？就是那个手套啊，或者是什么那种塑胶材质可以 expand 的，有没有？那种东西叫 latex，OK？ 那我有没有跟你们讲过啊？就是 latex， 大家会对 latex 过敏啊，不是因为对 latex 过敏，是对 latex 里面的杂质过敏。OK， 因为那个 latex 它是一个 natural plastic，OK， natural 树会 secrete 出来的那个白白的东西。那问题是说它是树的 origin 的话，它里面会掺杂一些树的 proteins，OK， 那有的时候你戴到手上或者戴到你身体上，它会对你的皮肤造成过敏，因为每个人不一样嘛 ，OK， 所以很多人他们会想说，那我直接去做这种 isoprene 有没有？我去合成这个 molecule， 然后用化学的方法去把它变成就是聚合物，然后这个东西就比较不会有过敏的 possibility 这样 ，OK，that's latex，right？ So latex is very, very useful. In Southeast Asia， 像那个印尼啊，他们 produce 超多 latex，OK， 所以几乎全世界大概有几10% 的 supply 是从那个 Southeast Asia 出来的。OK， terpenoids. Okay, here I want to tell you the versatility of your terpenoids or isoprenoids pathway. Right? So I use isoprenoids and terpenoids interchangeably because they're pretty much talking about the same thing. Okay, now. We talked about this, okay? 这个是 Mevalonate pathway. We talked about that. You start from 这边是 2 acetyl-CoA and this is 3 acetyl-CoA, okay? So you start with here 3 acetyl-CoA, okay? To make 1 IPP or DMAPP, okay? So that means that in order to make 1 terpene, okay? Terpene, remember, is 10 carbons. So to make 1 terpene, you need to have 6 acetyl-CoA, okay? 6 acetyl-CoA. All right, so turns out, this is Mevalonate pathway. People knew about that. And then a while ago, people realized that in some plants and bacteria, a lot of times, okay, you got this other pathway to make DMAPP and IPP. Okay, so this is actually kind of interesting because why would you evolve 2 different pathways to make the same thing? Okay, so this is something that nature is very good at doing. Okay, a lot of times you have versatility. Okay, you have different kinds of metabolic pathways that lead to the same intermediates. Okay, so that you can have different ways of doing this chemistry. Now, this other pathway, a lot of times we call it the non-Mevalonate pathway, or a lot of times we're going to call the MEP pathway. Okay? MEP pathway, it's actually talking about this molecule. Okay? The methyl erythrophosphate pathway, okay, so whatever, MEP pathway, okay, or you can remember as the non-Mevalonate pathway, okay. All right, so the non-Mevalonate pathway starts from 1 pyruvate and 1 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, okay, and so this guy is 3 carbons, this guy is 3 carbons, but these things 5 carbons. So it's going to tell you right away that you're going to have a decarboxylation reaction somewhere, okay? 中间某个地方你会吐一个碳, right? Turns out, first reaction already spits out the carbon, okay? So you have a decarboxylation, you have reduction, you have a activation using CTP, right? And then another activation using ATP, right? Such that at the end you will get this HMB diphosphate, okay? And then all you got to do is get rid of the OH, and then you will get to DMAPP, okay? So, it's just another pathway. You don't have to remember the details of the pathway. Just remember the difference between the non-mevalonate pathway and the mevalonate pathway, okay? So my purpose is for you to know that mevalonate pathway comes from acetyl-CoA. The non-mevalonate pathway comes from pyruvate and your glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, huh? All right. So give you guys a very good example of where this is used for biotechnology. Okay. So you guys are biotechnology, and in the future you will become biotechnologist. 有这个东西吗? Okay. 好像没有. All right. So if you guys want to stay, regardless of whether or not you stay in academia or you stay in research, it's always good to know. Taxol. Taxol, it's one of the frontline anti-cancer drug. Okay, so it's a very potent anti-cancer drug. So if unfortunately you got patients with cancer, okay, they're diagnosed with cancer, a lot of times you will have to go through chemotherapy. Okay, chemotherapy, 化疗, right? So chemotherapy, one of the most potent drug for chemo is your Taxol. Okay, Taxol, this guy. Now Taxol is derived from this plant called the Pacific yew tree. Okay, so it's derived from a tree. Okay, so this is the picture of the tree. And what you should know is that if you want to treat one patient, okay, per patient that has cancer, you need to harvest essentially around 3 fully grown trees. Right? So, this is going to have a very huge negative impact on the environment, and it's also going to jack up the price like crazy because every person you need to have 3 trees. How long does it take to grow 3 trees? Very long, right? So because of that, your chemo is usually going to be expensive, okay, a lot of times, right? So what biological scientists or engineers can do, okay, is that let's say we can find out the metabolic pathway that makes Taxol, okay? Let's just find out how the plant naturally makes Taxol. Then we can just clone and then transplant the pathway into something like yeast or E. coli. Then we can have a much cheaper resource or much cheaper source for Taxol use in patients. Okay. Now, so it turns out this was done in 2010, published in a Science article. So the way they did it was they did it in E. coli. Okay. So what they did was they found out the reaction pathways to make Taxol. All right, so this is Taxol. But of course, Taxol is very complicated. So let's say we're just going to stop at the precursor, taxadiene. Okay, taxadiene. Now, going from the precursor, what you can see is that you already got a lot of the general structures to this molecule. Okay, so essentially all they did was, right, this is a, how many molecules? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is diterpene, okay, because it has 20 carbons, right? And essentially, you know how to get here. You can get here by sequential addition of IPP to DMAPP, right? So 你可能有第一个是 DMAPP 加 IPP， 然后你再加一个 IPP， 再加一个 IPP， 你加个3次 and then you get this molecule, okay? This is called GGPP, okay? Geraniol pyrophosphate. Something like that, okay? GGPP, 这个东西, okay? And then go from GGPP, you use one synthase, okay? A taxadiene synthase, I guess, TS. And you can convert that in one step, go from this guy, GGPP, to taxadiene. Okay? And this is the precursor to make Taxol, right? Now, the downstream reactions we can probably do using chemistry, right? We can use organic chemistry to do it. But the key is be able to have a large supply of this, right? So you can use E. coli to produce this, right? So then this will eliminate the need of cutting down a bunch of trees. So happy for Earth and happy for patients. Right, so this is an example on textile dyeing. Artemisinin is a secondary metabolite found in plants. Okay, so this thing is it's actually a Chinese medicine. Okay, so 中药真的，如果你对中药研究有兴趣的话，其实 maybe 你们可以去研究那种，你今天 harvest 一堆中药有没有？然后现在大家在做那个 metabolomics、proteomics 这种类型的 research 嘛，就是上学期有上我课的话，应该有听过我讲过，现在很多 multi-omics 的 study 有没有？我们从早期的 genomics 到 transcriptomics 到 proteomics， 然后最后到 metabolomics， 就是今天你有个生物，那它这个生物里面有各式各样的代谢物，对不对 ？chemicals 在里面。那比如说我们知道中药吃了可能有效 ，OK， 应该有效。这个我不是在鼓励大家没事去嗑中药了 ，OK， 但是就是好像感觉 through 这么多年的历史，好像有一点用嘛 ，OK， 但是你不知道它的 active ingredient 是哪些 ，OK， 比如在这些中药里面，真正对你身体有帮助的东西是什么？那有可能不是一样东西，有可能是 a combination of 很多个这种 bioactive 的 molecule， 那可能可以 quote 调节你身体 ，I don't even know what that means，OK。所以其实这些草药里面它有很多不同的 molecules， 会有一些 bioactivities，OK。那for example, artemisinin is a very good example. Okay, it's derived from a Chinese medicine, right? And artemisinin primarily it's used to treat malaria. Okay, malaria is not a disease that occurs a lot in developed countries. It usually occurs in the underdeveloped countries because malaria is usually caused by, for example, pests, insects, okay, those things, right? 所以如果你环境你没有办法有一个很好的这种基础建设，这种 fundamental 的 infrastructure 的话，你很容易会有一些这种 infection。那 malaria is going to be primarily affecting people from, for example, Southeast Asia, Africa, right, those places, particularly in Africa because they're very, very hot there, right? And areas of poverty, okay? And one of the problems with malaria is that because they're poor, right? Because they don't have a lot of money, so they cannot afford treatments for malaria, okay? And in addition, because artemisinin is extracted from plants, okay? So then you would have to extract a lot of plants to get artemisinin, right? So a very good contribution to society would be, let's say we can make artemisinin through a much easier process and you can make it at a much higher concentration, right? So this is what people did, right? So a group of engineers, I think it was at UC Berkeley, I think they did this when? A long time ago, yeah, 2006. This was published in Nature or Nature Biotech, I forgot. What they did was they engineered E. coli or yeast, okay? And what they can do is they can go from simple sugar, okay, and we know acetyl-CoA, right? And this is the, down to here, those are the mevalonate pathway. That we know, okay, so we can clone the genes for mevalonate pathway into E. coli. And then your E. coli would make IPP and DMAPP, okay? And then we can make GPP, right, through combining IPP and DMAPP. And then GPP, if you use another IPP, you can get farnesene pyrophosphate, FPP, right? And go from FPP, normally you use 2 of those to make squalene. Okay, so I don't want to make squalene. Okay, I don't want to make squalene. And what I can do is I can use 3 enzymes, okay, or a couple of enzymes that essentially converts your farnesene pyrophosphate into this thing called morphodiene, which is a precursor to artemisinic acid and precursor to artemisinin. And in series of reaction, okay, these monooxygenases, again, okay, here it's a carbon, here you put an OH group, right? So it's monooxygenase. 然后你会问我说，哎，奇怪，为什么不是什么 hydratase? Right? It's because the way that this molecule was oriented, it's going to use molecular oxygen as the substrate, right? But all I want you to know is go from the mevalonate pathway. In the end, what you can get is artemisinic acid, which then develops the general structure for making artemisinin. Okay, so then we can use chemical processes to make artemisinin, and then you will have a cheaper way of treating malaria. Okay, 所以这种东西就是各位在做biotechnology 的时候可以去想的，有什么东西是可能你现在要去合成，可能要比较难或是比较贵，那你可能可以透过说，哎，那我让比较便宜的 organism 去合成这个东西，那会不会更有效 ？Okay, 所以 those are some of the things that you can think about. Right, so artemisinin. Right, just so you know, it's derived from isoprenoids. Right, so those are all the stuff that I want to talk about for isoprenoids and terpenoids, right, terpenes. So next, I want to focus on natural products. Okay, natural products are very important because many types of pharmaceuticals are either natural products or they're natural product derivatives. Okay, so think about all the drugs that we have in the market. Okay, all of these bioactive molecules. 这些 bioactive molecules 呢 they're not going to be derived from petroleum, okay? Duh, okay? They're going to be derived from plants or bacteria or yeast, fungus, okay? They're going to be derived from biology, okay? 真的，只有 biology 呢是有这种 natural capability 去 synthesize 一些很复杂的 molecule, okay? 那对我们来说，所有这种 bioactive 的 compound 很多时候都是一些复杂的 molecule, right? Now, natural products tend to be produced in smaller quantities because they are secondary metabolites, okay? So they're not needed for maintaining cellular functions. Secondary metabolites are useful for survival, okay? So for example, you can have these weird microorganisms or you can have plants, okay? They make a lot of stuff, right? So natural product, by definition, it's just a chemical compound that's produced by a living organism. You can consider that natural products, okay? Now, bioactive natural products has a pharmacological or biological activity for use in humans, okay, or animal health. For example, you can do antibiotics, you can do anti-cancer drugs, you can do immunosuppressants, you can do cholesterol-lowering agents, right? So of course you have a lot more. 真的比这4个多，但是给你看这4个是因为 guess what？ 这4个的 market 会大了 ，OK？ 就是 human society 最需要就是4个，抗生素，对不对？然后这个化疗的药物，然后 immunosuppressant，OK？ 抗发炎药 ，right？ 然后最后就是抗这个 lower 你的 cholesterol 的 drug. Now, there are many different types of natural products. Okay, I can't even finish all of them. Now, here are some major natural products that you will see. Okay, you have polyketides. Okay, and polyketides, for example, tetracycline. Do you guys know what tetracyclines are? Tetracycline is a type of antibiotics. Okay, it looks yellow. All right, it's horrible to use in the lab because it's dissolving ethanol. Right, but it's antibiotics. Right, and I'm going to show you the pathways or the enzymes used for polyketides, okay? It's very similar to fatty acid biosynthesis. We'll talk about that. You also have peptides, okay? Peptides, both ribosomal and non-ribosomal, okay? I'll show you what non-ribosomal peptides are, but essentially they are just enzymes taking amino acid as a substrate and hooking them up, okay? Not through the central dogma, okay? 不是透过什么扣档，有什么 ATG、GGG 乱七八糟 G，OK， 不是透过 translation 给你的蛋白 ，OK， 有一些小蛋白呢，你是可以透过一些 enzyme，OK， 这些 enzyme 它可以去吃 amino acid， 然后把2个 amino acid 做反应 ，OK， 那种东西叫 NRP non-ribosomal peptides，OK， 有这个东西。You also have aromatics, okay, from shikimic pathway plus polyketide pathway. We'll talk about shikimic pathway later, okay, when we talk about aromatic amino acids. Terpenoids, we just spent so much time on terpenoids, so you guys know what that is. You also got alkaloids and carbohydrates. Okay, alkaloids, for example, morphine. Morphine is used to, get you high. And I'm just kidding. It's to used before you have a surgery, right? Carbohydrates, type of molecules, type of natural product. For example, ascorbic acid, vitamin C. It's called also a lot of times the sugar vitamin, okay, because it looks like a sugar, and it is sugar. Okay. All right. Sources of natural products, very diverse. You have plants, you have microorganisms. For example, acetomyces and filamentous fungi. Okay, so these guys have huge number of different metabolites that have bioactivities. For example, for actinomyces, you got something like 10,000 different bioactive products that they can produce. Okay, and used in humans, we get about 100 to 120 different molecules that we can use. Okay, but of course there are other molecules that we can use too. So these are examples of useful pharmaceutical natural products. These are natural products that are produced by organisms that are useful for us. We saw artemisinin, we saw Taxol, this guy's Taxol. Okay, we got other stuff like, we also saw lovastatin, and this guy's penicillin we haven't seen. Okay, we also saw that. And what else do we see? That's it. Okay, so we saw those examples. And what you can see is that you got plant natural products that are used for anti-cancer, antioxidants, and all sorts of functions. You got fungal natural products that can be used for anti-cholesterol, antibiotics. This guy's penicillin. Okay, penicillin 呢，它是一个 NRP， 它这个东西就是一个 NRP， non-ribosomal peptides, right? Penicillin. Now, I don't think I have to explain why penicillin is important, right? I think you guys know. And you also got bacterial natural products. That's interesting. Bacterial natural products, for example, you got antibiotics, you got anti-cancer, you got antibiotics, okay? And antibiotics, you have polyketide type, you have NRP type, okay? So it really is not specific to, for example, 不是说 antibiotics 就一定是要 polyketides, okay? Antibiotics 也可以是 NRP， 也可以是其他的 molecules, right? 这只是跟你说，我们可以 categorize 这些 molecules based on 它们是什么类型的 molecule， 它是 polyketide 呢，还是它是 NRP 呢，还是它是什么的 ，okay? Right? Natural products, why is it important to us? Okay, it's very important to us because natural products are usually used as lead drugs. Okay, 我们叫 lead drug. Now, usually, natural products may or may not have very good activity. Okay, but sometimes natural product may have weak activities. Okay, or it has good activity but it sucks in pharmacokinetics, meaning you take it and like it's degraded in 2 minutes, okay? So it's useless, okay? Or it doesn't go into your body, okay? So poor pharmacokinetics, okay? It sucks, all right? So because of those properties, a lot of times we need to design better drugs, okay? But how do we design better drugs? We need to have this thing called the lead, okay? 有点像是你要先有一个 base 的model, 然后你才能去 modify 这样, okay? For example, give you a very good example. This is a new antibiotics that is derived from tetracycline. Okay, tetracycline was antibiotics that was used a while ago, but very quickly you got bacteria that are resistant to tetracycline. Okay, so if you have bacteria that's resistant to tetracycline, what we can do then is we modify tetracycline such that the resistance gene does not deactivate that. 听懂我意思吗？听懂我意思哦，可以哦，勉强接受，哎，所以就是我们 always 会有一些 lead drug， 我们在做药物开发的时候，你通常都会先去筛，一般人啦，早期现在是不是这样？应该不是，现在很多是用电脑去模拟。早期我们在筛药物的时候，我们其实有很多那个 chemical companies 哦，那他们其实会有一个很大的 library of biomolecules， 很大的 library 什么意思？就是这家公司呢，它可能会卖那种一盘一个96孔盘，然后里面各式各样的药，然后他们可能有几千个96孔盘，那每一个盘子里面都是一个不同的药物 ，OK， 然后你可以去跟他买，你去跟他买这个盘子，然后你就可以去测，一个一个测，就测说你的 比如说你的这个 bacteria 会不会被他们的药物干掉？那可能出来你一定会有非常有效、还好有效跟完全无效 ，right？ 那完全无效的 drug 你就不要管它，还好有效的东西你可以先留起来，然后非常有效的东西你当然你就很嗨嘛，你就可以直接去测。那很多时候可能会比如说对人类也有毒啊，或者是什么的，对不对？那你可能就要从 maybe 还好有效、有一点点效果的那种 drug， 然后从那个 drug 上面呢，我们去做 chemical modifications， 那你就可以去开发一些新的药。所以我们在开发新药主要有2个很大的 objective： 一，它是有效的，它可以真的有效；二，它的这个对 human 的 toxicity level 不是那么高 ，right？ 然后当然还有包括我们需要它有很好的 pharmacokinetics 跟有的没有的 ，OK？Right？ So that's just some example for it. Another thing is lovastatin to simvastatin. Okay, so all you gotta do is modify it a little bit, right? Turns out it's actually harder than you think. Putting a methyl group here is very difficult, right? But people can do that, right? Again, natural products, a lot of times from bacteria or from fungus point of view, it's usually used as a defense mechanism. For example, you have 2 microorganisms, right? Both of them want to grow. The guy that produces the secondary metabolite can sort of kill the invading organism such that this guy can keep on growing and growing, okay? Make sense? Right? So those are some of the functions for secondary metabolites, okay, that you should know. All right, now, I want to talk about polyketides, and I only have time to talk about polyketides, right? So what are polyketides? I'm interested in polyketides because polyketides, the synthesis of polyketides, you guys should be very easily grasp, okay? You can easily grasp. All right, what are polyketides? Polyketides are essentially substances made by head-to-tail connection of acetate and or propionate, sometimes even butyrate or others, units which are not completely reduced. 看了这一句英文，然后你根本不知道他在讲什么，对不对？有没有这种感觉？不知道他在讲什么，对不对？好，来 allow me to explain. OK， 来咯。Fatty acid 呢，我们说啊 fatty acid 它是 repeat of 什么 subunit？ acetyl-CoA 嘛，对不对 ？acetyl-CoA， 那 acetyl-CoA 其实是什么？就是 acetate 嘛，对，就是 acetyl-CoA 跟 acetate，right？ 所以如果 based on 这句话啊，我们可以说这个 fatty acid 等于 head to tail connection, okay? Using acetate, okay? Using acetate, 对不对？如果我们 based on 这句话的 structure， 我们可以这样说，就是 fatty acid is made by head-to-tail connection using acetate. This is like the if you look, this is like if we say this is head, and this guy is tail, then this is the head, and this is so. This was the tail, right? Tail to another head, and this is another tail. So you keep on adding it until you get something that looks like that, right? Okay. So fatty acid is it's a sequence of reaction which you can say it makes head-to-tail connection using acetate. Okay, 这是 fatty acid. 然后 one last thing, fatty acid 呢是 completely reduced. Basically, look at the carbon chain. It's completely reduced. Okay, polyketides does not have to be. That's the special thing about polyketides. You can stop at keto, you can stop at hydroxyl, you can stop at alkene, or you can go to alkane. Okay, fatty acid 你没有选择 ，you don't have a choice. 它每一次在加下一个2个碳的时候，它一定是 saturated， 它一定要到 alkane 那个等级。OK， 但是这个 polyketides 呢不用，它可以 keto，OK， 就是3 keto， 你马上再加下一个 acetyl-CoA。OK， 这个我们这礼拜5会继续把它讲完。